It wasn't the rain or the red car that stopped me. It was the look in her eyes, like someone who still believed help might come. I didn't know it yet, but that moment would undo decades of power and, maybe, save what little was left of my soul. The woman I'd helped on the shoulder of Route 78, soaked in rain and stranded beside a busted red sports car, now stood in the center of the very casino I was supposed to own by morning. Not a helpless stranger anymore, but something else entirely. That night was supposed to seal 10 years of blood and business. A deal with South American partners that could have tripled my reach from Jersey to Miami. I'd prepped for weeks, played politics, threatened the right people. I had 15 minutes left on the clock when I saw her. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, the kind that made taillights bleed across the blacktop like oil. My driver had pulled over for a piss break, a mistake. That's when I spotted the red coupe, rim twisted, tire shredded, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat in crisis. She was standing beside it, long dark hair stuck to her face, heels sinking into wet asphalt, hands smudged with brake dust. Not screaming, not crying, just standing, watching cars pass. She looked expensive, out of place, like she belonged in a Manhattan high-rise, not stranded on some Jersey backroad. I almost told the driver to keep moving. But something in the way she met my eyes through the windshield, unflinching, unreadable, made me crack the door open. I walked toward her alone, rain slicing across my tailored suit. "You all right?" I asked, already crouching. She nodded once, but didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed the wrench, knelt down in the puddles, and started fixing what was broken. My father used to say, when you see something broken, you either walk past it or you get your hands dirty. He'd vanished when I was 13, probably fed to the Atlantic by men I now outrank. But his voice still shows up when I least expect it. I didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for mine. 20 minutes later, I watched her drive off into the dark. By then, the deal was already slipping through my fingers. I stood on that shoulder, soaked and silent, with grease on my hands and a pit in my gut. And I remember thinking, I picked the wrong night to feel like a man instead of a monster. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The smell of diesel and hot coffee clung to the air as Rinaldo stepped back into the casino's side corridor, still damp from the storm. He moved like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just thrown away a once-in-a-decade deal to help a woman with a flat tire. His shoes left wet prints on the marble floor, a quiet trail of guilt he couldn't scrub off. In the distance, the hum of poker chips and glass tumblers blended into the hollow din of broken expectations. Leo stood by the bar, his jaw tight, eyes sharp, already knowing too much without asking a damn thing. Leo lit a cigarette with the impatience of a man who wanted to throw it at someone instead. They waited 2 hours, he said coldly, not turning to face Rinaldo. The Colombians bounced. Boston's already circling like it's feeding time. Rinaldo didn't flinch, just ran a hand through his wet hair and motioned for whiskey. "We'll fix it," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if it was to Leo or to himself. Leo finally looked at him, expression unreadable but clearly calculating. "You don't miss meetings, boss. Not you. That's what makes you who you are." Rinaldo downed the whiskey in a single swallow, fire burning down a throat already raw with regret. "Car trouble," he said flatly, knowing how thin it sounded. Leo scoffed. "Right. You? With a garage of German imports and a mechanic on retainer." The unspoken accusation hung in the air. "You chose something else." Rinaldo didn't deny it. He just reached for another drink, silence sealing the fracture forming beneath their partnership. By morning, the whispers had already reached Newark, then Brooklyn, then Boston. Fallaci slipping, they said in quiet rooms with dark walls and louder knives. He's gone soft, showed up late, let the Colombians walk, let Leo clean up the mess. In their world, there were only 2 kinds of men, the ones you feared and the ones you replaced. Rinaldo knew which one he used to be and which one they were betting he'd become. Still, he showed up like clockwork to the docks, black coat whipping in the wind, nodding to the men who didn't meet his eyes anymore. He inspected shipments, signed off manifests, stared out at the water like it held answers. But the weight was different now, heavier, like the air just before a storm. And Leo, always near, always silent, was watching more than working. Nancy Wilson adjusted the wire in her blouse and tapped the side of her earpiece twice, clear signal. The federal safe house outside Trenton still smelled like new paint and stale donuts, but it was quiet at least. Her handler, Clark, sat across from her with a tablet glowing in his lap, fingers drumming like he couldn't wait to call her crazy. "You saw him face to face and didn't call it in," he said, not bothering to hide his disbelief. "You were 3 feet from Rinaldo Fallaci, and you let him walk." "I didn't let him walk," Nancy replied calmly. "He stopped for me. Changed a tire himself. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't even give me a name." Clark raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "So now we're letting Mafia bosses go because they play roadside hero?" Nancy held his stare. "You told me to get close. This is close." She took a breath, replaying the way Rinaldo's hands moved with the wrench, how he worked without a word, how he didn't try to impress her or intimidate her. "He's not what the file says he is, not entirely." Clark leaned back with a sigh, rubbing his temples like the truth gave him a migraine. "You're not falling for this guy, are you?" Nancy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the window, watching a truck pass on the freeway with a tarp flapping like a warning. "He had every reason to ignore me," she said, voice lower now. "That deal, whatever it was more important than helping some stranded stranger. But he stopped anyway. Not for leverage. Not for show." Clark leaned forward again, eyes narrowing. "People like Fallaci don't do things without a reason. Maybe he saw through you. Maybe he's playing a deeper game." Nancy shook her head. "He didn't know. I'm sure of it." Clark gave a bitter laugh. "You ever try playing chess with someone who doesn't even move the board but still wins? That's who you're dealing with." Nancy shifted in her seat. "You didn't see him. He was human tired, maybe even sad." Clark's fingers paused on the tablet. That word, sad, didn't belong in a file labeled organized crime. Tier 1 threat. "You're projecting," he said quietly. "And you're walking a thin line. Get too close to fire, Nancy, and you stop noticing you're burning." She smiled without humor. "Funny." He said something similar. Clark looked up again, concern deepening into something harder. "Listen to me. Get what we need, and then get out. This isn't a redemption story. It's a takedown. Stay in the pocket, but keep your hand on the exit." Back in Jersey, the sky hung low like smoke, and Rinaldo's phone never stopped buzzing. Leo handled most of the heat, smoothing over cartel egos, silencing the Boston whispers with thin threats. But even he couldn't spin the fact that Rinaldo had missed something unmissable. Rinaldo, meanwhile, sat in the corner booth of Il Gatto Nero, swirling espresso, staring at the empty seat across from him. He hadn't asked for her name, but now he couldn't stop hearing it in his head. Nancy. He kept replaying that look she gave him just before driving off. Not grateful, not scared, just seeing him. And it haunted him in ways bullets and betrayal never had. That look made him feel like a man who might still be worth saving. And that terrified him more than any rival. Leo slid into the booth without invitation. "Boston's testing our fences," he said. "Came up Route 1 last night, scoped the docks. No moves yet, but you know how they play, press until something cracks." Rinaldo nodded slowly, but his eyes were far away. "I need to know where your head's at," Leo said bluntly. "You with me, or are you somewhere else?" Rinaldo looked up, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You ever fix a tire in the rain, Leo?" Leo blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" Rinaldo didn't smile. "It's not about the tire. It's about remembering what it feels like to do something clean." Leo leaned back, arms crossed. "You're not paid to feel clean. You're paid to make the dirt stick to someone else." Rinaldo met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe I'm just tired of feeling like a ghost in my own empire." Leo studied him for a beat, then nodded like he understood and didn't like it. "Be careful, boss. Regret makes men bleed quicker than guilt." Outside, a pair of men in dark coats watched from across the street. Boston muscle. Just watching for now. The game was still being played, but the pieces were shifting fast. And Rinaldo Fallaci, for the first time in years, Wasn't sure which side of the board he was standing on. Nancy sat in her temporary safe house, going over intel for the third time that day. Port authorities. Shipping manifests. Slush accounts. Money that started in Jersey and ended up in unmarked vaults. She traced the routes Rinaldo's crew used, routes no one else had dared touch. But the more she mapped, the more she understood the architecture beneath it all. Rinaldo wasn't a brute. He was an architect, a strategist playing 5 games at once. It made the tire iron and the rain even harder to reconcile. How could a man that precise kneel in the mud to help a stranger? She flipped the photo of him over. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was a question. A line she hadn't crossed yet, but was inching toward. She knew she should hand it all in, package him clean, write the ending the Bureau wanted. But she couldn't stop wondering, what if he's already trying to end it himself? And worse, what if I'm the reason he doesn't? The room smelled like top-shelf bourbon, secrets, and fresh cards. Rinaldo stepped into the penthouse suite of the Veludo Casino, nodding once to the 2 guards at the door, one Boston, one local muscle. The lighting was low and warm, gold against the black marble, shadows flickering across the faces of the men already seated. No phones. No weapons. Just money, silence, and the kind of conversations that never made it into official record. The host gave him a nod and gestured to the last open seat, right across from a woman in a navy blazer, heels crossed, posture straight as a blade. She didn't look like the others. No cigar. No scotch. Just an untouched glass of water and a stack of chips she seemed to know exactly how to handle. Rinaldo's breath caught, but his face didn't change. She raised her eyes, same as before, but this time she didn't flinch. "Claire," she said when the host made introductions, voice like silk with a steel undertone. The lie didn't surprise him. What surprised him was how easy she wore it. He nodded back. "Dominic," he said, his own alias, chosen for these kinds of nights. They played without speaking for the first half hour, the table tense with money and old grudges. Rinaldo folded early, then won 3 in a row with a cold stare and calculated bets. Claire played tight, sharp raises, quick reads, no wasted movement. Every so often, she glanced at him just long enough to keep him guessing. It was a dance, and both of them knew it wasn't about the cards. He leaned back during a break, swirling bourbon in his glass, eyes flicking across her like he was seeing her for the first time again. Same eyes. Same curve of the mouth when she was calculating risk. But the hair was pinned now and the suit was tailored. This wasn't the woman stranded on the roadside in the rain. He wondered what her endgame was. What kind of intel she was gathering. Whether this was a coincidence or a message. The poker room wasn't just a game, it was a hunting ground. And if she was here, she was either the bait or the one setting the trap. Across the table, Nancy Claire kept her face smooth, but her pulse ticked like a metronome in her neck. She hadn't expected him to show up here. Not this soon. Not this close. But the moment their eyes met, she knew the game had changed. The room blurred at the edges as she shuffled back through the case files in her head. Fallaci Rinaldo. Born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Father disappeared when Rinaldo was 13, presumed dead, body never found. By 17, Rinaldo was already moving weight across the Bayonne docks. By 25, he'd orchestrated the quiet exit of 3 rival crews without a single bullet making the papers. His empire was silent, clean, terrifying. But in between the lines of police reports and financial audits, Nancy had found the margins. Donations to small Catholic charities. A construction scholarship in a dead man's name. A picture of a rusted-out fishing boat named Sophia, his mother's name. She'd spent months tracing that contradiction. A man built from violence who still whispered his prayers before pulling triggers. She had read transcripts of interrogations, listened to wiretaps, studied his body language like a second language. But nothing prepared her for what she saw that night on the side of the highway. And nothing prepared her for the way he looked at her now, like he recognized her, but respected her silence. The dealer pushed another hand across the felt. Claire raised without blinking. Dominic matched with a single chip and a long sip of bourbon. Around them, the other players faded into static. This was no longer poker, it was surveillance disguised as a game. Nancy tried not to think about how close he was. About how the scent of his cologne pulled her straight back to the rain, to the moment his hands, scarred and silent, tightened the last lug nut. She should have called him in then. Had a clean collar, walked away a hero. But she hadn't. And now the lines between duty and instinct were too blurred to redraw. She scanned him for tells, jaw tension, shoulder shifts, blinking patterns. But he gave her nothing. Just calm, still power. The kind that said, "I've bled more than you've dreamed, and I'm still standing." Rinaldo finally broke the silence, voice low and conversational. "Where you from, Claire?" She smiled politely, like someone used to evading questions without effort. "DC mostly. But Jersey's grown on me." He nodded slowly, one brow raised. "You always play this clean?" "Only when it matters," she replied. The air thickened between them like unspoken history. No one else at the table noticed, or if they did, they chose not to interrupt. In their world, private wars often looked like polite conversations. Rinaldo leaned back again, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking rule. No one stopped him. No one ever did. The hand ended with Claire folding and Rinaldo bluffing into a small win. But neither cared about the pot. It was the eye contact after, the lingering glance, the quiet understanding that something bigger was happening beneath the surface. She picked up her glass with deliberate calm. He tapped ash into a golden tray. In a flash of memory, she saw his hand gripping the tire iron, rain pouring off his jacket, steam rising from the engine. You knew who he was, her handler's voice echoed in her mind. But you let him walk. Now she was in the same room, walking straight back into the fire. And God help her, part of her wanted to see if it still burned. During the next break, Rinaldo stepped out onto the rooftop balcony, letting the ocean air cool his skin. She followed, deliberate but distant, like she just happened to need fresh air too. "You're good at this," he said without turning. "So are you," she answered. Then quieter. "Why did you stop that night?" Rinaldo stared at the Atlantic, waves crashing against the dark horizon. "Someone taught me a long time ago, if you see something broken, you fix it. Doesn't matter if it costs you." She tilted her head, her voice barely above the wind. "Even if it costs you a kingdom?" He smiled, not cruel, just tired. "Especially then." She stood beside him in the dark, closer than she should have. The city stretched behind them, glittering like something fragile. "What happens if we play this out?" she asked softly. "You take me in?" Rinaldo exhaled a long plume of smoke, eyes never leaving the waves. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe we just play until someone folds." She didn't respond. Because the truth was, she didn't know either. All she knew was that the line she'd sworn never to cross was starting to look like a lifeline. They returned to the table without fanfare, sliding back into their seats like nothing had shifted. But everything had. The other players came and went, chips exchanged hands, drinks refilled. But for Rinaldo and Nancy, Dominic and Claire, the game was no longer about cards. They were studying each other, reading intention between silences, testing where the line between mask and face began. And both wondering the same thing: if this ends, who will pull the trigger first? If you were in Nancy's shoes, knowing who he was, but seeing something deeper, would you still choose to stay in the game? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you want to see how this dangerous dance unfolds, don't forget to subscribe. Leo stood in the doorway of the warehouse office, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. He didn't knock. Just watched Rinaldo with the gaze of a wolf trying to decide if the pack leader had gone soft. Rinaldo looked up from the shipment manifests without blinking, setting his pen down with the kind of calm that made lesser men nervous. "You got something to say, Leo?" he asked, voice like cold steel. Leo stepped inside, boots echoing on the concrete. "Yeah," he said, dragging the word like a weight. "I got a crew asking why the Colombians are backing off and the Boston boys are suddenly bold." He stopped in front of the desk, leaning down just enough to make his point. "And I got a boss who's too distracted to give a damn." Rinaldo met his eyes and didn't blink. "Watch your tone," he said evenly, though the warning was real. Leo straightened, but didn't back down. "Something's off, and you know it. You've been slipping since that night, you know the one." Rinaldo stood slowly, the scrape of his chair loud in the quiet room. You think I answer to you now? Leo shook his head once, slow and deliberate. No, but I got a loyalty to this thing we built. If you're drifting into something that's gonna burn it down, I need to know before we all catch fire. Rinaldo stared at him, remembering the years they'd bled together, on docks, in basements, under flickering backroom lights. Leo had been there when they took back Atlantic City, when they cut ties with the Sicilians, when they buried that cop behind the old bakery on Essex. But this wasn't about history. It was about fear, Leo's fear that the man at the helm was looking for a lifeboat. You know me, Rinaldo said finally, voice quieter now. If I ever burn this down, I'll light the match myself and tell you where to stand. Leo nodded once, but his eyes stayed sharp. Just don't wait too long. I don't like guessing who the enemy is, especially when he might be sleeping under our own roof. Then he left, door swinging shut behind him with a thud that echoed more than it should have. Rinaldo stood alone in the dim light, his reflection caught in the office window, gray at the temples, lines etched deeper than he remembered. He didn't trust easily, never had. But lately, he didn't even trust himself. Leo wasn't wrong, something had shifted. It started with a tire, a woman, and a choice he'd made without strategy. He should have let it go. Should have written her off as a fluke. But now she haunted his mind at quiet moments, like cigarette smoke he couldn't wave away. He wasn't sure if he was slipping or waking up. Either way, Leo was right about one thing: the crew could smell it, and the wolves were starting to circle. Miles away, in a locked room above a shipping office marked Maintenance, Nancy stared at a monitor lit with shipment logs and access requests. Every fourth manifest looked clean, but she knew what to look for. Repeated routes, duplicate container IDs, soft timestamps. Money didn't just move through banks, it floated in on crates and vanished under forged paperwork. And one name kept reappearing in the sign-off logs: G. Fallaci. Her breath caught. She hadn't known Rinaldo had a brother, or maybe it was a shell name. Either way, it linked the operation straight to his family. She tapped the screen, downloading the files onto an encrypted drive, fingers trembling just slightly. Every time she thought she understood who he was, another piece surfaced, darker than the last. She leaned back in the creaky chair, heart knocking against her ribs. The laundering channel was massive, millions moving through shipping containers marked as construction aggregate. A safe front for dirty money, routed through half a dozen shell companies before disappearing into Cyprus or Dubai. She'd been trained to spot this kind of system. But seeing his name in the chain made it harder to pretend this wasn't personal. Nancy closed the laptop and leaned her elbows on the desk, hands pressed together. The mission hadn't changed, but she had. And now she was standing on a wire, balancing her badge on one end and a man like Rinaldo Fallaci on the other. She needed perspective. She needed distance. But instead, she picked up her burner and sent a message, still thinking about that poker hand. Meet? The diner was tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a laundromat that hadn't replaced its sign since 1987. Rinaldo was already at the booth when she walked in, coffee steaming in front of him, coat folded neatly beside him like someone raised with manners he hadn't needed in years. Nancy slid into the seat across from him, setting her bag down slowly, her expression neutral. "Dominic," she said. "Claire," he replied, and for a moment it was like they were still pretending. But the silence said otherwise. She ordered tea, more for something to do than thirst. He studied her like she was the table's only puzzle worth solving. "You always play poker with that straight of a face?" he asked. "Only when I'm bluffing," she said, and something in his eyes flashed like he enjoyed the challenge. "I looked into you," Rinaldo said after a beat. "You mean you had someone follow me," she corrected. "Same result." He took a sip of coffee, watching her reaction. "You're not who you said you were." "That name's a lie." She didn't flinch. "So is yours." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Fair enough." They sat in the tension a moment longer, letting the truth hang there like humidity. Then Nancy leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. "So, what are we really doing here, Rinaldo?" He looked out the window, watching an old man load coins into a parking meter. "My father used to bring me to diners like this," he said quietly. Said you could tell everything about a man by how he treated waitresses and how he stirred his coffee. Nancy didn't interrupt. Rinaldo continued, eyes still distant. He disappeared when I was 13. Walked out on a Tuesday morning and never came back. I always thought I'd find out why, he added, voice growing softer. That I'd trace it all back to something I did, or something I didn't. But some things don't get explained. They just become part of you. Nancy felt something tighten in her chest, not pity, but recognition. She knew what it was to be shaped by silence. I built this life to outrun that feeling, Rinaldo said, finally looking at her again. Made sure no one could disappear on me again without consequences. Nancy met his gaze. But somewhere along the way, the consequences became the life. He nodded slowly, like he'd already told himself that 100 times. Maybe. She could see the war in his eyes, between the part of him that had climbed to the top by breaking things, and the part that wondered if there was still time to fix something. What do you want from all this? She asked softly. An ending. Rinaldo exhaled. No. A clean page. Even if it's the last one. Nancy stood up first, needing air more than tea. I'll be in touch, she said, grabbing her bag. Rinaldo didn't stop her. Just nodded, then turned back to his coffee like it was the only thing still making sense. Outside, the wind cut sharper than before, and the city lights looked further away than usual. She walked fast, trying to outpace the knot forming beneath her ribs. She was trained to spot cracks in criminal armor, but she hadn't prepared for this. A man cracked open not by greed or fear, but by something dangerously close to hope. And somehow, she knew that was the most dangerous thing of all. The moment the email hit Clark's inbox, the room went cold. An encrypted message with no header, no sender, just a warning, your girl is compromised. It came with a grainy photo, Nancy at the poker table in Atlantic City, opposite Rinaldo Fallaci. Clark's jaw tightened as he scanned the image, already dialing the secure line to Washington. Whatever thin line Nancy had been walking just snapped underfoot. He slammed his laptop shut, voice clipped. We've got a leak, he said to the empty safehouse walls. Somebody tagged her. Someone on the inside. The task force had been clean, or so they thought. But someone was watching Nancy from the other side now, and it wasn't just the bureau anymore. Inside a blacked-out SUV crawling through Newark, Leo stared at the same photo Clark had just seen. His contact from South Jersey, ex-Boston crew, now freelance, had sent it through with one line beneath it. She ain't who she says she is. Leo's cigarette burned low between his fingers, forgotten. He zoomed in on her face, then back to the Atlantic City security logs. A Homeland Security agent named Nancy Wilson had checked into a nearby hotel under a government block. Leo didn't need more. To him, it was confirmation, not theory. He closed the tablet, dropped it into the seat beside him, and made a call to a burner he hadn't used in a year. We got a rat, he said simply. Redhead, early 30s, goes by Claire in the circles. Fed badge says Nancy Wilson. Make it look like she vanished. Quiet, clean. No call to Rinaldo. No heads up. Leo figured his boss had already grown too close. And if Rinaldo found out later, he'd forgive it, once he saw how close they'd come to collapse. The order went out like a ripple through dark water. In a diner in Bayonne, Nancy stirred sugar into her coffee, watching the entrance. She was supposed to meet Rinaldo in 30 minutes, another quiet chat, another page in the game they were writing with glances and guarded truths. But she felt something. A shift. Like the air knew something she didn't. She picked at her croissant, eyes moving from car to car outside. A black sedan pulled into the lot and didn't park, just idled. Nancy stood slowly, bag slung over one shoulder, hand instinctively moving toward the burner in her coat. Something was off. Her instincts, trained, honed, were screaming now. She didn't wait. She slipped out the back, down a service corridor, into the alley. Her feet moved before her mind caught up, already recalculating escape routes. She texted Clark, compromised. Going dark. And then she turned her phone off. Back in Jersey City, Rinaldo leaned against the hood of his car, checking his watch again. She was never late. Not without a reason. He scanned the lot from behind tinted glasses, every shadow suddenly looking like it carried meaning. His driver stood by, silent, picking up on the shift. "She's not coming," the kid said eventually. Rinaldo nodded once but didn't move. "You hear anything?" he asked, voice low. The driver hesitated. Words floating about a redhead sniffing around the poker nights. Fed badge. Quiet chatter from Philly says someone's already marked her. Rinaldo turned slowly. "Say that again." The kid swallowed hard. "They're saying a Fed got too close. Could be her. Don't know for sure." Rinaldo's jaw clenched. That coffee shop conversation, her eyes, the tension. It all clicked at once and then cracked down the middle. He didn't say another word. Just got in the car and shut the door hard enough to make the windows shiver. The engine roared to life. "Find Leo," he said to the driver, voice dead calm. Now. Leo was exactly where he always was when he didn't want to be found, half-lit backroom of an Irish bar off Montgomery Street, nursing whiskey and playing chess alone. Rinaldo pushed open the door and didn't wait for pleasantries. "You put out a hit?" he asked without ceremony. Leo didn't look up from the board. "Had to be done." Rinaldo crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed his hand down on the table, scattering pieces. "You went over my head," he hissed. Leo looked up now, eyes cold but unafraid. "You weren't gonna act. She's a Fed. You knew it." Rinaldo's silence was its own confirmation. "She had you distracted," Leo continued, standing now. "We both saw it. You missed the Colombians. Let Boston sniff around. That's not you." Rinaldo's fists balled, but he held back. "You had no right." "I had a duty," Leo shot back. "To the family. To the empire you built before she walked into your life with a fake name and real eyes." Rinaldo turned away, hands pressed to his temples. "We don't kill someone just for being the truth," he murmured. "That was never the rule." "She's gone," Leo said simply. "Vanished. If she's smart, she's not coming back." But Rinaldo didn't believe it. Nancy was too good to vanish without a trace and too stubborn to run scared. He stormed out, phone already in hand, checking every back channel, every runner, every whisper. Nothing. No pings. No burner activity. No hotel logs. Just absence. The kind that made you feel like maybe you imagined them to begin with. Nancy holed up in a safe house in Hoboken, walls painted beige and furniture too bland to remember. She didn't sleep much, just paced and stared at the burner that never rang. She replayed every moment, the diner, the black car, the feeling in her bones. Leo. It had to be him. Clark's voice echoed in her head. "Get too close to fire, you stop noticing you're burning." She hadn't just burned. She'd lit the match herself. And now she didn't know if she was hiding from the job or from Rinaldo. Outside, rain started again, same kind as the night they met. It tapped on the windows like a memory. She sat at the edge of the bed, hand curled around the burner, wondering if he'd call. Wondering if he knew. Wondering if he was the one who'd tried to erase her. But in her gut, she didn't believe it. Rinaldo had shadows behind his eyes, sure, but not that kind. He wouldn't kill her for who she was. Not unless something inside him had already died. Rinaldo stood in the rain now too, staring out over the Hudson from the same spot his father used to take him fishing. The wind cut through his coat like punishment. Leo's words circled like vultures. "She's a Fed. You knew it." Maybe he had. Maybe not in words, but in instinct. And he still let her in. He remembered the look in her eyes when she asked him what he wanted. A clean page, he'd said. Maybe this was the price of trying to write one. Maybe people like him didn't get clean pages. Just blank ones. Ones you left behind when the story ended mid-sentence. But he wasn't ready to let this be the end. Not yet. Not without knowing. And not if Leo had taken something that wasn't his to erase. He made one more call. Quiet, encrypted, only 2 people on Earth had the number. A former fixer who owed him more than a favor. "I need eyes," Rinaldo said. "On someone who's vanished. And if she's alive, I want her found before anyone else." He hung up without waiting for questions. Back in the Hoboken safe house, Nancy finally powered on the burner. One message blinked. No ID. No timestamp. Just 5 words. "If you're still breathing, meet me." If someone you trusted put a target on your back, would you still give them the chance to explain? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're hooked, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens when loyalty turns lethal. The rain was coming down in sheets, the kind that turns streets into rivers and headlights into ghosts. Rinaldo's tires hissed against the wet asphalt as he took the turn onto Route 27 like a man chasing time. The call had come from his fixer, muffled, urgent, just 2 words before the line went dead. Found her. A no-name motel just outside of Edison, tucked between a truck stop and a liquor store. He didn't think. He just drove. His phone buzzed again as he pulled into the gravel lot, a second burner lighting up with a message. They're close. One shooter. Silver Buick. His eyes flicked to the edge of the lot, where a car sat with the engine running, tail lights pulsing like a heartbeat. No movement inside, but he knew better than to trust the stillness. He cut his engine, cracked the door, and moved like a ghost into the rain. The motel was dim, the kind of place that didn't ask questions and didn't change the sheets. Rinaldo moved quickly, eyes sweeping, every instinct wired tight. Room 6B. He passed a woman dragging a laundry cart who didn't look up. Just another night. Just another storm. He found her just as the silencer flashed in the window. One shot cracked the air, a muffled pop swallowed by the storm, and slammed into the doorframe inches from her head. Nancy dropped to the floor, rolling behind the cheap dresser, gun drawn but wide-eyed. Rinaldo didn't shout. Didn't announce himself. He just kicked the door open and fired twice into the silver Buick before diving inside. The shooter didn't wait to trade bullets. The car peeled out of the lot, fishtailing across the gravel, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Rinaldo crouched beside the bed, chest heaving, coat soaked through. Nancy stared at him, gun still aimed, jaw locked. "You," she said, disbelief slicing through the adrenaline. He raised his hands slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't lower the weapon. "You knew," she said, voice shaking. "You knew they were coming and you waited?" Rinaldo shook his head once. "No. I came the second I knew they might." The silence between them was louder than the storm. Finally, Nancy exhaled and lowered the gun. She looked down at her hands like she didn't recognize them anymore. He sat on the edge of the bed, dripping water onto threadbare carpet, watching her pace like a caged animal. "You're everything I was trained to destroy," she said suddenly, words sharp and bitter. "I studied you. Memorized your life, your patterns, your lies." Her voice cracked like a window under pressure. "And then you show up on the side of a highway like some decent man changing a tire." Rinaldo looked at her with something close to pain in his eyes. "You knew who I was," he said, calm but firm. "And you still let me fix your damn tire." Nancy froze, back to him, shoulders tense. "That doesn't mean anything," she whispered. "It means something to me," he replied. She turned, eyes wet but defiant. "Why didn't you walk away that night? Why stop for me?" Rinaldo stood slowly, the weight of years making every movement deliberate. He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "Because I wanted to feel human for 5 minutes." Nancy's throat tightened at that. Not because it was manipulative, but because it felt true. Too true. The kind of answer that made your training irrelevant. The kind that didn't come from a monster, but from a man who used to remember what mercy tasted like. They didn't speak for a while after that. Just sat in opposite corners of the room, soaked and silent, the storm chewing at the roof above them. Nancy cleaned the cut on her arm where glass had grazed her. Rinaldo stared at the wall like it owed him an apology. Outside, sirens howled in the distance, but none turned toward the motel. Eventually, she asked, "How bad is it?" He looked over, expression unreadable. "Leo gave the green light without telling me. That's how bad." Nancy's lips parted, something dawning on her. "He thinks you're compromised." Rinaldo laughed once, humorless. "He's not wrong." Nancy wiped blood from her sleeve and stared at the floor. "So what now?" she asked, quieter than before. "We wait out the night," Rinaldo replied. "Tomorrow, we figure out what to burn and what to save." Nancy looked up. "And if there's nothing left worth saving?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her with the kind of silence that meant he'd already thought about that. She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. There was no plan that didn't cost them something. The only question now was how much. Rinaldo eventually peeled off his wet coat and tossed it onto a chair. "You hungry?" he asked, trying to shift the tension sideways. Nancy shook her head, then hesitated. "Actually, yeah. Starving." He pulled a granola bar from his coat pocket and tossed it to her with a smirk. "Not exactly 5-star, but it won't kill you." "That's a refreshing change," she said, biting into it anyway. They ate in silence, the sound of wrappers and chewing oddly comforting. For a few minutes, it felt like they weren't enemies. Like they were just people who got caught in the crossfire of a world too bent to fix. Rinaldo leaned back, legs stretched, eyes half closed. "Funny, isn't it?" he muttered. "We're both running from the same people and somehow still afraid of each other." Nancy looked at him for a long time. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I'm afraid of what you make me question." Rinaldo opened one eye, studied her. "Like what?" "Like whether I'm still on the right side." Her voice was barely audible now. He didn't press. Didn't need to. The room didn't need more confessions, it was already heavy with them. Instead, he got up, crossed to the window, and cracked the curtain. The lot was empty. The Buick was gone. But the danger wasn't. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll be back." Nancy nodded. "Where to?" He thought for a moment, calculating. "A place I built before all this. Back when I still thought I could have something normal." She stood, grabbing her bag. "Lead the way." As they moved through the shadows, their steps fell into rhythm, two people who didn't trust each other, but trusted no one else more. And in that broken logic, a kind of bond was forming. The rain had eased by the time they hit the road again, but the world still felt soaked in tension. Nancy sat in the passenger seat, watching the motel disappear in the rearview mirror. "Do you think he'll stop?" she asked suddenly. "Leo?" Rinaldo shook his head. "Not unless I stop him first." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "Would you?" He didn't look away from the road. "If I have to." She didn't push further. She didn't need to. The road ahead was quiet, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. The file sat on the motel room table like a loaded gun. Inside were coded manifests, laundering routes, dead-drop locations, enough to tear open the international side of Rinaldo's empire like a bleeding wound. Nancy didn't touch it right away. She watched him instead, how he stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes hollow, like he was handing over part of his own skeleton. "This isn't everything," she said quietly, thumbing through the first page. "It's enough to make a dent," Rinaldo replied. "Enough to get attention without burying the men who stayed loyal." His voice was flat, but underneath it, she heard the weight of old friendships, blood oaths, debts carved into skin. "You're dismantling it," she said. "Not all at once," he corrected. "But from the inside, yeah, it starts here." Nancy looked up at him, the file still in her lap. "You know what happens if this lands in the right hands?" He nodded. "Wars start. Doors close. Names disappear." She flipped to the last page, where only a single set of offshore accounts remained unredacted. "And what happens to you?" she asked. Rinaldo's jaw flexed once. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is cleaning up the mess I made before someone else drowns in it." Nancy studied his face, searching for cracks. But this wasn't guilt, it was something deeper. Purpose, maybe. Or penance. Leo, meanwhile, was watching everything from the shadows. The whispers had grown louder, the crew restless. His contacts at the docks were talking about sudden shutdowns, cargo inspections, last-minute deletions from shipping logs. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was fact. Rinaldo was moving pieces, and not just for defense. The empire was shifting, and Leo wasn't invited to the table. That's when he decided to set the trap. A weapons exchange scheduled for Thursday night, low profile, high risk. The kind of job Rinaldo would never skip. Especially if he suspected betrayal. Leo made sure word leaked, just enough to draw him in. Back in the hideout, Nancy paced with the burner pressed to her ear. "You're not going," she said the moment Rinaldo answered. He was already lacing up his boots, strapping a sidearm to his ankle. "I have to," he replied. "Leo's playing a move, and I need to see how deep it runs." She stopped pacing, voice sharp. "It's a setup. You know that." He didn't argue. just picked up his jacket and checked the magazine in his pistol. "You don't outrun blood," he said quietly. "You face it." Nancy closed her eyes, pressing her palm to her forehead. "So that's it? You're walking in." Rinaldo paused at the door. "I walk in. But I don't go blind." The warehouse was in Newark, abandoned, crumbling, and crawling with ghosts. Rinaldo parked 2 blocks out and approached on foot, rain soaking the back of his collar. He kept low, checked the corners, scanned for shadows. It was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, crates lined the walls, empty, most of them. Meant to look busy. Meant to hide the real purpose. A trap doesn't work unless it looks like a transaction. Rinaldo stepped into the light of the skylight, shoulders squared. "All right, Leo," he called. "Let's see if you've got the stones to come out yourself." The answer came in gunfire. A single shot cracked the silence, whistling past Rinaldo's shoulder and burying itself in a steel pillar. He dove for cover, returning fire with precision, hitting nothing but crates. Boots scrambled above him, someone on the catwalk. 2 more shadows flanked the upper deck. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a message. "Leo," Rinaldo shouted. "You send dogs after me now?" No answer, just another shot, closer this time. He ducked behind a shipping container, breath calm despite the chaos. He wasn't here to beg. He was here to end it. On the edge of the warehouse lot, Nancy watched through binoculars from a stolen car. The sound of gunfire made her grip the steering wheel tighter. She'd warned him. Pleaded, even. But Rinaldo had that look in his eyes, the kind that came right before someone burned their life down for a principle. She picked up her burner, thumb hovering over the call button. But what would she even say now? "I told you so? Run? I can't lose you?" None of it would matter. He'd already walked into the fire. The best she could do was be there if he made it out. Back inside, Rinaldo moved like a man who'd lived through worse. He took down the first shooter with a shot to the knee, the second with a broken pipe. The third clipped his side, a graze, but enough to remind him this wasn't theater. Blood bloomed beneath his shirt, hot and fast. Still, he pushed forward. Then Leo appeared, descending the catwalk like a man arriving at his own funeral. "I wanted to believe you, Rinaldo," he said. "Even after the girl. Even after the files. But you changed." Rinaldo raised his gun. "Maybe I did," he said. "But you? You stayed exactly the same." Leo paced slowly, revolver dangling at his side. "We built this together," he said. "Brick by bloody brick. And now you want to burn it because what? You found your conscience in some Fed's eyes." Rinaldo didn't respond. He just aimed. "You don't get to say her name," he said. "You're soft," Leo sneered. "And soft men don't survive." He raised his weapon. Rinaldo fired first. 1 shot, center mass. Leo staggered, dropped his gun, then crumpled to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. Rinaldo limped out of the warehouse minutes later, blood staining the edge of his coat. Nancy was already at the curb, car idling, door open. She met him halfway, one arm looping under his to steady him. "What happened?" she asked, breath catching. "Leo," Rinaldo said. "It's done." She helped him into the passenger seat, hands shaking. "You're hurt," she said. "We need to stop the bleeding." "Later," he said, eyes half closing. "Drive." She hit the gas. Behind them, the warehouse glowed faintly. Someone had lit a flare. It wouldn't take long to burn. They drove in silence for a while, the city blurring by in streaks of orange and blue. Nancy kept glancing over, checking for signs he was fading. But Rinaldo just stared out the window, jaw clenched, blood still seeping from the wound. "You did it," she said finally. "You really burned it down." "No," he murmured. "Not yet." Nancy frowned. "Then what was that?" He turned his head, just slightly. "That was me cutting loose the last man who would have dragged me back." She didn't press further. There would be more nights for questions if they survived. Instead, she reached over, took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and trembling. He didn't pull away. Somewhere behind them, a life Rinaldo had built in blood and fear was turning to ash. And for the first time in years, he didn't look back. The warehouse on Dock 19 looked dead from the outside, just steel walls and rusted shutters, breathing steam into the night. But inside, It pulsed like a heart under siege. Leo's men lined the catwalks and corners, armed, armored, and waiting. No shipments. No crates. Just a battlefield disguised as business. Rinaldo stepped into the shadows with nothing but a pistol, a knife tucked in his boot, and enough fire in his chest to burn through the guilt. He knew what this was. Leo had hollowed out the operation and filled it with his own loyalists. There were no lines left, only sides. And tonight, he had picked his. The first shot cracked before the door even closed behind him. Rinaldo ducked, rolled behind a rusted forklift, and returned fire without hesitation. A body dropped from the upper rail, limp and silent. Another muzzle flashed from the rafters, but he was already moving, slipping into darkness between columns of empty pallets. Bullets pinged and sparked around him like angry rain. His heartbeat didn't race, it steadied. He'd fought in tighter rooms, bloodier nights. But this felt different. This wasn't about surviving. This was about ending it. He took down the second man with a close shot to the gut, no time for finesse. The third charged from the stairwell, screaming Leo's name like a prayer, and Rinaldo met him blade first. The knife sunk deep. Bone, maybe? He didn't stop to check. Blood slicked the concrete underfoot as he climbed the steel stairs, pressing a hand to his side where a bullet had grazed him. His vision blurred at the edges, but he kept moving. Below, the warehouse lit with gunfire. Muzzle flashes blinked like dying stars. Screams echoed, sharp and unfinished. Leo stood on the upper deck, framed by a skylight cracked from storms and age. His revolver was drawn, but his stance was calm. He'd been expecting Rinaldo, maybe even hoping for him. "You made it," Leo said, like they were meeting for drinks, not death. "Your men are done," Rinaldo said. "So are you." Leo gave a slow nod. "Maybe, but at least I didn't run from who I was." Rinaldo stepped closer, his breath heavy. "You're not loyal, Leo. You're just afraid of becoming irrelevant." Leo's hand twitched on the grip, but he didn't raise it. "We built this together," he said. "We buried the same bodies, carried the same sins." Rinaldo's jaw tightened. "And I carried them long enough for both of us." Leo's voice cracked, something desperate bleeding through. "You think this ends with you? You burn me, someone else steps in." "Let them," Rinaldo growled. "But it won't be you." He holstered his pistol, drew the blade again, and advanced. Leo fired once, twice. One missed. One hit. But Rinaldo didn't fall. He lunged. The knife caught Leo's shoulder first, then drove into his chest. They slammed into the railing, breath colliding, eyes locked like wolves. "You made me choose," Rinaldo hissed, blood slicking his lips. "Loyalty, or something better than fear." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I chose." Leo's mouth moved, maybe to curse, maybe to plead, but no sound came. Rinaldo twisted the knife once, then let him fall. Leo's body hit the metal floor below with a thud that shook the silence. It didn't echo. It ended. Rinaldo stumbled back, hand pressed tight to his wound. Fire licked up from the ground floor. One of the crates had ignited, the flames eating paper, plastic, everything fake they'd built. Heat crawled up the walls like it wanted to erase every secret they'd ever hidden there. He limped down the stairs, smoke curling around him, eyes watering. The metal groaned. Flames cracked through the roof. The whole place was dying, and Rinaldo didn't look back. He staggered through the side door, coughing, one arm dragging against the wall. His blood marked the exit like a signature. Nancy slammed the car door open the second she saw him. "Jesus," she breathed, rushing to meet him. His coat was scorched. His shirt soaked red. But his eyes were alive. "It's done," he rasped. She hooked an arm under his shoulder, guiding him into the back seat. The fire lit the skyline behind them, an orange inferno swallowing steel. Rinaldo leaned against the seat, breath ragged. "Leo?" Nancy asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The car peeled away as sirens wailed in the distance, late to a war already finished. Nancy glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his face pale, jaw clenched. "Stay awake," she said, voice steady despite the panic rising in her throat. Rinaldo gave a half smile, lips cracking. "Been through worse," he muttered. The truth was, he hadn't. Not like this. This wasn't about wounds. This was about the weight. He had killed the man who knew him longest. And somewhere deep, that wound bled worst of all. Nancy's hands gripped the wheel tighter. "You didn't have to go alone," she said. "I did," Rinaldo replied. "Some debts, you settle yourself." She blinked hard, focusing on the road. "What now?" He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. "Now," he said, "we finish what we started. We bury the ashes and build something that won't burn so easy." Nancy didn't say anything, but she drove faster. They didn't speak for the next few miles. The rain had started again, washing soot and blood into the gutters. Somewhere behind them, the warehouse crumbled. Leo's body turned to dust. And with it, a chapter of Rinaldo's life finally closed. But not without cost. Every pulse in his veins reminded him what it meant to choose change in a world that fed on sameness. And every glance from Nancy reminded him why it was worth it. They weren't enemies anymore. Just survivors of each other, of themselves, of everything they thought they were. If it meant breaking from everything you built, your friends, your past, your power, would you still choose to do what's right? Let us know in the comments. And if you're riding this storm to the end, hit subscribe to see what rises from the ruins. The hospital band on Rinaldo's wrist was the only proof he'd been anywhere in days. By the time Nancy returned with painkillers and coffee, he was gone. No note. No calls. Just sheets still warm and a faint trail of blood down the hallway. She stood there for a full minute, eyes fixed on the empty bed. No chaos, no confrontation. Just silence, his preferred exit. She didn't panic. Didn't chase. She knew this was how men like Rinaldo disappeared, quietly, completely, like smoke from a long-burned fire. Nancy didn't return to the safe house. She drove straight to the field office and handed over a drive with 5 years' worth of movement logs, financial laundering routes, and partial names. Not enough to burn the entire syndicate, but more than enough to cripple the outer ring. Arms lines would freeze. Shell companies would collapse. Rinaldo had given them pressure points, just not the kill shot. Her handler, Clark, listened with a mix of awe and skepticism. "Where's the rest?" he asked. "The core files. The ledger." Nancy met his eyes and said nothing. Just handed over the drive and sat back in the chair like she was done answering questions. "You had access to everything," Clark pushed. "You're telling me this is all he gave you?" Nancy leaned forward, voice cool. "I'm telling you this is what we need to start doing real damage. Unless you're looking for a trophy instead of results." Clark didn't blink. "You're protecting him." Nancy stood, gathering her coat. "I'm protecting the truth that matters. What you do with it is on you." She walked out before he could reply. Some endings didn't need to be spoken out loud. Over the next 2 weeks, headlines bled red. Indictments dropped. Offshore accounts were seized. Shipments vanished. 2 senior members of the Atlantic cartel were arrested in New York. 3 more disappeared from Miami, likely before they could be flipped. Nancy kept her head down. Let the suits celebrate. Let them take credit. She knew better than to get attached to press conferences and medals. It wasn't over. Not really. At night, she still checked her phone. Not because she expected a message, but because silence was too loud without it. Some part of her still hoped he'd call, say he was all right, say it wasn't really goodbye. But she also understood that Rinaldo Fallaci didn't do curtain calls. He walked away, and he meant it. Still, hope clung to her like fog. Thin, invisible, and impossible to shake. She didn't admit it, not even to herself, but she'd started dreaming of him. Not as a gangster. Not even as the man who saved her. Just as someone who might have been more. The package arrived on a Thursday. No return address. Brown paper. No markings. It was left at her apartment door, wedged between the welcome mat and a stray leaf. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But her name was written in clean, block letters. No postage. No ink smudge. Just her name. She picked it up slowly, heart already racing before she unwrapped it. Inside were 3 things. A black leather ledger weathered, but intact. A flash drive taped to the back. And a torn napkin with 5 words scribbled in black ink. "Some debts you settle by walking away." Nancy sat on her couch without breathing, eyes locked on the napkin. She traced the handwriting with her fingers. She knew it by heart now. Her throat tightened. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just sat there with the weight of a man's final choice resting in her lap. The ledger was everything. Offshore accounts, blacklist names, international partners, politicians on the take. It could burn the entire system to the ground. And he'd given it to her. She opened the flash drive next. Encrypted files, photos, audio logs, testimonies from men who never talked, and one short video clip. It was him, Rinaldo, seated somewhere nondescript, backlit by a window. He looked older than he had weeks ago. Tired, but calm. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said in the video. "Not from the people I hurt. Not from you. But I had to make sure it landed with someone who'd use it right. Someone who'd finish what I couldn't." He looked away for a moment, as if gathering breath. "This doesn't fix me. It doesn't make me good. But maybe it makes the story end better than it started." He paused again. "You asked me once why I stopped to help you." His eyes returned to the lens. "It wasn't about redemption. It was about reminding myself I could still choose it." The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than the words. Nancy closed the laptop slowly. Her hand trembled. She looked at the ledger for a long time after that. She could turn it in. End entire networks. Shift the tide of an empire. She had what no one else had ever touched: the keys to an underground kingdom, handed over not by force, but by choice. But something in her hesitated. Not because she didn't want justice, but because she understood now that justice didn't always need headlines. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do with truth was protect it. She opened her fireplace, lit a match, and fed the ledger to the flames page by page, after memorizing every number, every name, every date. Some she'd keep for leverage. Some she'd bury forever. But the book itself would burn. The napkin? She kept it. Folded it once, slid it into the back of her passport. The message was simple, but it was enough. The fire crackled and hissed as the last page curled inward. She stood watching until it was nothing but ash and heat. No applause. No vindication. Just her and the quiet understanding that not all stories end in arrest reports and final shots. Some end in silence. In choices. In names you never speak again. But always remember. The road wound along the edge of the coast, where waves licked the rocks with a rhythm older than guilt. Nancy drove with the windows cracked, salt air cutting through the remnants of city noise, still echoing in her mind. It had been months since the last arrest, weeks since the final report was filed. The world had moved on, but pieces of it still clung to her. The town ahead was small, tucked between inlets and fog. Fishing boats rocked in the harbor, their paint faded, names half-scrubbed by weather and time. Locals moved slowly, like nothing here was ever urgent. She passed a bait shop, a diner with a crooked open sign, a pier with hand-painted numbers on the moorings. It was the kind of place where a man could forget who he used to be. She parked beside a stack of lobster traps and stepped out, boots crunching on wet gravel. The sea wind tangled her hair, carried stories she couldn't name. Somewhere down the pier, a man in a navy jacket hauled nets out of a boat. He wore a cap pulled low, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands weathered from work that wasn't violent. She didn't need to see his face. She knew it was him. Rinaldo moved with quiet efficiency, dragging crates, rinsing tools, nodding at the dockmaster like he'd been doing this his whole life. Nancy stayed back, one hand resting on the hood of her car. She didn't call out, didn't wave. She just watched. His hair was grayer now, beard rougher, the lines at his jaw more defined. But his eyes, when they flicked up and scanned the horizon, were still the same. Watchful. Waited. Alive. She thought of walking down to him. Just to say one thing. Just to let him know the world hadn't swallowed his sacrifice in silence. But she didn't. That wasn't the story they wrote. Some chapters end with words. Others end with knowing. Instead, she turned and walked back to her car. He never turned. Never acknowledged her. But she knew he'd seen. She could feel it in the stillness that followed. The kind of silence that spoke louder than memory. She got back in, shut the door gently, and stared at the wheel for a long time. Then, for the first time in a long while, she smiled. Not a grin. Not victory. Just a quiet kind of peace. The kind that comes when you know someone made it out. Not untouched. Not clean. But free. And that was more than most ever got. Weeks later, Nancy stood before a wood-paneled Senate committee room, lights overhead sharp, questions sharper. Her suit was simple. Her words were measured. She laid out networks, names, facts. Testified with poise about how a criminal empire had quietly imploded from the inside. She answered every question. Except one. Do you know the identity of the whistleblower who provided the critical files leading to these arrests? A senator asked. His voice was rehearsed, authoritative, public. Cameras tracked her every blink. Nancy looked up calm. No, sir, she said evenly. I was simply in the right place at the right time. A pause. Then a nod. No follow-up. Just silence again. She left the chamber the same way she had entered, quietly. No applause. No headlines. Just footsteps down marble halls and the faint echo of something larger left behind. Reporters called her name. She kept walking. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that hides both storms and sun. She slipped on her coat and walked into it without looking back. Not because she was hiding anything, because some truths protect themselves. She never spoke his name again. Not in official reports. Not in private debriefs. Not even to herself when sleep came thin. But she carried him in the way she stood, in the way she moved forward, in the way she chose mercy when rage would have been easier. Some men don't need statues. They just need someone to remember. To say, he didn't run. He chose. And when asked months later, years even, what it all meant, she answered with the only truth that still mattered. The one that couldn't be redacted. The one that had lived in silence between bullets, between choices, between two people who should have been enemies. I didn't catch the biggest shark, she said, her voice soft. But I watched him swim away from the blood. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.